everyone, welcome back. I'm actually in my other studio. I have a patron of the arts, that's what we call her, and she lets me come into her garage when I have projects that I need to build that are too big to build in my tiny home, which you all have seen. So I'm in my garage studio, and one of the perks of being here is that I actually keep my dress form here, so I wanted to just pop the vest on so you all can see. Now it definitely needs another good pressing to it to make sure that the points of the end are out, and we're about to get into doing buttonholes here, but it's looking pretty good. Now I'll get a little closer so you can kind of see what our back looks like with shoulders. Now this is a size 8 woman's dress form, meaning that it does not have the right barrel chest and the shoulder width for our male vest, but it at least gives us the idea of what it should look like. And our collar looks good, it laid flat. There's a little stitching, we can't see it on the camera, like some stay stitching that I just have to take out. It's nothing that has to do with construction. And there's always little threads. No matter how much I try to clip my threads, there's always like little bitty threads that will come through, but it's looking really good. Kind of see the side. Now I pinned it here just so it would look better from the front. But if we pay attention to the side is looking straight. Our fronts are looking straight. And we have this one little piece. And this is the left side. So women are always right over left, but men are just the opposite. So as we always say, women are always right. Meaning that women's clothing always closes on the right hand side. It's just a fun little thing that we say in the sewing world. So next step, we're going to do the tabs, which go on the back, and that will pull the vest in so we have a little bit more shaping to it. And then we're going to go back to the front and do our buttonholes and cut them open and sew on our buttons, and I believe we'll be done with our vest. So we'll be using pattern piece number 6, the tab. Now I think this is a little confusing. I'm going to try to get a little closer. It says stitch along here on the pattern piece, but if you look at the instructions, which I'll have in one of these little corners, it actually tells you to fold this here, fold like so, and then sew diagonally this way with our 5/8 seam, sew down, leave a hole in between, and then stitch, which I'm going to demonstrate. But I just thought that was really confusing on the part of the pattern, and all of these patterns always have little inconsistencies, which is part of why it makes it hard to get into sewing as a beginner, because the instructions will say one thing and then the pattern will say something else, and you kind of have to just figure out what is the correct way. So let's get sewing. Make my corners the same way we did them on the vest. I just believe it gives me sharper corners, unless I'm in a rush. And then I'm like, we'll just keep going. That usually only ever happens on set. I forgot to leave a hole. So now I'm gonna go back and just leave a little hole here to turn it inside out, because I have to sew the bottom. Womp womp, it happens. Reverse sewing is a part of sewing. I think it's, we might actually do almost as much reverse sewing as we do regular sewing, and that kind of just goes for everybody. So I also am going to clip this down. I'm going to just cut this here. Hold on. Got my big scissors. Yeah, so I want to cut here. And I'm going to cut this down as well, because I just don't want all this bulk back here. The point of this tab is not to be bulky. The point is for it to make your vest, cut it up here, make your vest smooth. So I'm going to sew this end, but for now, I'll take my snips, or you could take your seam ripper and go ahead and just find a spot. I'm going to cut this little thread. Cut there, maybe go over an inch or so, cut again, pull the thread, and go ahead and open up our seam. A little baby seam. Now the instructions don't tell you to cut this down, but trust me, once you turn this thing inside out, you're not going to want to have all those seams. And also I want to cut this right here, just like we did on our vest. It seems like a lot, but we don't need all that bulk. And then I'm going to do the other one. So we're doing another slip stitch. Here. And it's just like the other one, except this piece is much smaller. So I'm going to try to do this in the air, but I want to go in between the two layers. So this is my opening right here. And I'm on, let's say, the top. I'm going to slide down to the bottom. Go back up to the top. A little bit. And then go down to the bottom. It's just like when we hand stitch something with the rocking stitch, except that we just go in between. So now you can see how the stitches are in between. So I'm rocking up, but that's too much, so back it up. Go back down. Slide in between the fabric. Go back up. Slide in between. That's where the slip part of the stitch comes from. So, and now we're up here. Sorry if that was kind of shaky. I was trying to do it all in one needle because I only left about an inch or so. Right. So now we can remove our straight pin. I'm going to go ahead and tie this off. Let's see. There's our knot. This is where we're ending. I'm going to take a little baby stitch. Okay. Baby stitch. Pull through. Once it gets to this little loop here, I'm going to go back through it. Pull. Pull, 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 pull. And then I'm going to do this again for good measure. And that should be plenty. Now remember to do this on the other side as well. Clip your threads and iron your tab. That way we'll have nice flat tabs to go on the back of our vest. And always put your pen back in the pincushion. And the proper way to do it, like so. Slide it through this way, because if you put your pin, this is just a industry like sewing pro tip. If you have a pin, right, and you put it like this, it is going to go all the way in and you'll never find it again. But you go to the side, rock it, just like you're taking a little stitch, and that way your pins don't slowly get eaten up by your pincushion. This pincushion is a muffin tin, by the way. I love it because it's nice and heavy, and it's kind of cool. I've had it so long I've even had to fix it. Like I had to add this piece of fabric because I punched so many holes in it. Yep, fun things. So we have to go back to our pattern piece number 2 here to find the markings for our belt. And this is also not a hard, fast rule because for me, I'm short, so I really need to move my vest belt up here so that it can fit my waist. But since this is sort of like my generic person vest, I'm going to put it exactly where it is to be marked. And the same goes for you. If you are short-waisted like me, I'm only 5 feet, you may have to raise your belt up maybe 2 inches. Or again, you could always just put it here, try it because it's going to be top stitched, and go for it. And if it works, it works. If you're like, it's fine, it's just a vest, I have no plan on wearing this vest, it's just for fun, cool. So I have my little chalk roller thing here, and this is good. It's not my favorite, but it leaves a very faint chalk mark. So when doing things on the top that people can see, I like to just make a tiny little mark. You can kind of hear that sound. Barely see the mark, which is perfect. It's exactly what I want. Barely a mark. And I'm going to repeat it on this side of my vest, and then we can go ahead and do the top stitching down of our little belts. Now for this, I do not sew this 5/8 inch. I really do maybe an 1/8. I would say no more than 1/4 of an inch. I don't want to try to take up belt, and I also don't want all this excess belt over here. So this is where it's good to take your time, go slow. And I also made my stitch length a little smaller because this is going to have a lot of tension, and so the more stitches we have, the better it will be at holding the tension. Now, the pattern calls for D-rings, but I really like these little sliders. It doesn't really matter to me as long as there's something adjustable. Comes two to a pack, open it up, use one. And I just find them simpler. I think that actors understand them better. That I always found that the D-rings were a little confusing. So what we're going to do is take one of the tabs, go through here and sew it, and then the other tab will get fed through, and then they'll all slide together. It's pretty simple. So I'm going to take my left side of my vest with my little ring here and feed it through. See, I can show you this. I have the ring through one side, wrap around, and then give yourself about an inch or so. Not too much. So I've got it on the back. I'm going to pull it a little bit. That should be plenty. I just like to give myself enough where it's not difficult to sew on the machine, because if you try to make it too close to right here, all this metal is going to get caught up in your sewing machine. Now we can go ahead and do it so you can see. So here is the edge, that slanted edge. I'm going to line up the, let's say, the end of the slant. Yeah, the end of the slant. Drop it down. And these little things don't have seam allowances anymore because they're not structural. So it's a lot of like eyeballing, a lot of seeing how things fit and work. And my machine got a little jammed. This happens. Okay. First. Now if you wanted to, cut your threads. Stitched. If you wanted to, you could have tucked this back under if you didn't want to see it, but it really is not going to show. Once we take our other side, so we have the left side, right side, we're going to take the right side, go through here, go through the other side, and voila, we have a belt. Ta-da! Done. Sometimes it's too long, it depends on the person, sometimes it's too short. I've had to adjust these all the time, but this is a general good size for just about everybody. I thought I'd pop it back onto the mannequin so that way you can see how this is supposed to function. It is red on red, so it can be a little hard to see, but say if we had someone who is a 40 chest but they have a really small waist, adjust, and then usually in theater, once we know who it is, I'll tuck that under and stitch it down or mark it, or if they need a little bit more space, you can make it much wider. Depends on the body. So that is how we do our little tabs and how they look on the back. And they really help create a good shaping here. And then we're gonna move on to our buttonholes and sewing on of buttons. And we'll be done. To mark your buttonholes, go ahead and get pattern piece number 1 again. They're already done, unless you have bigger buttons than what this calls for. My buttons are these little cuties, and they are generally the size of button that could go on a vest. They're a little big, but I just thought that they were so cute. So they're only a little bit bigger than what the pattern suggests, but I'm doing for this whole like Wild Wild West rosy roses kind of theme to my vest. So I want to have her be like this outlaw cowboy, you know, lives her own life type of a backstory that goes along with my vest. So I'm going to lay this out. Don't be disturbed by this flaring out. Remember that this corresponds with our vest collar, the continuation of our collar, which goes to about here, which is our first button, and that first button will create the fold. So if you're like, how come mine isn't quite folding like the pattern? It's only because we haven't gotten to that step yet. So I'm going to lay this out just so. And then go ahead and I like to mark it with straight pins. I'll kind of just put them in, especially if my buttons are a little bit bigger than the recommended hole. I mostly just want to use this pattern as my guide. Now I'm not going to show how to do a buttonhole, only because every machine is different. So my machine does a buttonhole slightly different than your machine, and so on and so forth. But know that the process is not that hard. Maybe I'll show a little bit of it, but again, every machine has slightly different dials that you turn and adjustments, and that's something that you need to consult. I decided that I'm not going to demonstrate how to do a buttonhole, only because every single machine is different. And my machine actually doesn't even have a button holder, so I do it the old-fashioned way, which is where I just move the dials where I need to make like a little bitty zigzag, and then go back and forth, and then I kind of start over to go straight again because I don't have the proper zigzag thing. However, every machine that's not old like my machine from the 60s has a built-in, not that someone from the 60s is old. We're not ageist here. We're just saying that sewing machines of that era did not come with button holders. It was not a thing yet. They were like attachments. But I love my old machines because they are workhorses. They will sew through anything. I can keep them in my car. They roll around when I'm going on set here and there. And I've dropped them a couple of times because I'm always on the go. And they are indestructible. Unlike the new modern machines, which if you have a modern machine, and even if you borrowed a machine from the school, you might have one that actually you can program it, and that's the moneymaker buttonholes. Like, you tell it you need a 7/8 buttonhole, and you do a couple practices, and then you tell it to go, and it will make a perfect buttonhole every single time. Unlike my buttonholes where I have to just like eyeball it. So I'm gonna do one buttonhole, not to demo, but so that we can get to the making the sewing on of these beautiful, cute little rose buttons, and then we'll be done with our vest. So I feel like I keep saying that. It's just because like once you get close to the end, it's almost like being in tech. If any of you have ever done tech week, where it's like, all right folks, we're almost there, we're almost there. 3 hours later, you know, it's like, we're almost there, we're almost there. But I promise you, we really are almost there. Like, once you get to belts and fasteners, you know, your vest is pretty much done. Oh, another note that I will put in the class course. So if you're like me and you do not have a buttonhole, and you're like, Constance, I've never done this before, there's another option. Option 1 is you can still use buttons, but on the, instead of doing all this buttonholing finagling, all you have to do is you'll sew your button on here, like so, and then sew snaps on the back side. So you have fake, we do this in theater all the time, it's called quick rigging. So essentially you're like quick rigging your vest. So you'll have snaps, you can like pop it open if you need a quick change. And then you'll have buttons on the front. You can also use toggles, which are pretty cool. I really love toggles, and I hope they kind of make a comeback. One of my little pens came out. You could use toggles, so you could have like maybe 3 or 4 toggles going down to hold your vest. You could do more of those little belts for your design. You could say, oh, I just want one belt to go from like here to here across your vest. Some other things, I don't recommend Velcro. I generally don't like Velcro because of the sound of it. If you wanted to put in a zipper, you could put in a zipper. Your vest has to have some kind of fastener, something to close it. That way we can, because if we don't close it, we won't be able to see. So our buttons will go here. If we don't have any kind of fastener, we won't get to see this, like, here we go. We won't get to see the proper collar fold if it's just left open like so. Be creative. Whatever things you think of you could possibly use. You could make little ties, have like little bow ties or something. There's lots and lots of possibilities other than a buttonhole. I'm just doing the buttonhole because that is what the pattern suggests and offers you as its option. But since we are designers and creatives and artists, we can always come up with something else. So I'm gonna do rose buttons and some buttonholes on this little baby. But if this on your baby, design it however you have. So I think that's all I had to say about that. I'm sure there's something else that I'm forgetting. But anyways, I'll be right back with some buttonholes that I'm gonna do on my old machine, and they're gonna be done the old-fashioned way, which is where you just eyeball it, which is a good skill to have. I mean, you know, you never know where you're gonna be, but hopefully you won't be in a situation like me where I need to make a buttonhole on the fly and I don't have a machine with a buttonholer. Anyways, see you soon. So let's talk about how to measure your buttons. Here is my hem gauge, and I'm gonna put my button on the end here. So this is measuring right at 1 inch, okay? So we don't wanna make our buttonhole perfectly 1 inch because then there'll be no space. And I've made this mistake several times. I think it'd be better to make it 1.25 inches. That way you have, think of it kind of going in this way. That's the best way to see this. Like if you can imagine it sliding through here. You want a little bit of space for it to be able to open. Otherwise, if you've ever had a shirt with too tight buttonholes, you won't be able to get it through. So I'd say do whatever it is, maybe do 1/4 inch. I think my mother likes to do 1/8 inch, but I don't know, I think it's just too close. So I usually do about 1/4 inch. And that goes for any button. So if it was, you know, much smaller of a button, it was only, you know, here, I still would move my hem gauge over. And then every time you lay it down, that's one thing I do like about the hem gauges is that at least these old-fashioned ones, they don't move. So I don't have to think about it. It's like set it and forget it. So set it and then mark here and here for your buttonhole each time. Here are the buttonholes. You know, not perfect, but that's okay. I wasn't aiming for perfection because the buttons are going to take up most of the space. And we probably will only see just a little bit hanging out. Like so. But it's gonna be so pretty. I can't wait. So let's move on to how do you mark your buttons on the opposite side. So this is the right side of the vest. This is the left side of the vest. Generally, I like to line it up. Let's see. I'll go from here. Make sure I have everything even. So it's like, okay, I know that these should be the same length, technically. And then from there, gently lift. And I want to place, like sliding. I want the end of my buttonhole to be just over the underlap, this part here. We're really only working from here to here because this is flared, because eventually, remember, this is going to fold here. So I want it to go over just a little bit more. Now at this point, let's see, this is the edge. Here's the buttonhole, right? So I might move it over just a little bit. And my buttonholes are not perfect. Again, not about perfection. I was like, what is that? Oh, that's the belt. If you feel something hard underneath there, it's the belt. So from there, if you really want to find the middle of the middle of the middle, you can get your hem gauge again, measure it. Measure it and find the middle of the middle. I, on the other hand, tend to do a lot of eyeballing. So I just find the middle. I'll put a pin in the middle. That's one thing about buttons, is you don't necessarily have to be crazy accurate. Like if it's off by less than 1/8 of an inch, you will probably be able to get away with it because they have so much space and play. From here, make sure that it's in there. It doesn't come out. Slide those down. I'll take either tailor's chalk or maybe sometimes a ballpoint pen. This time I'm just going to be using this little like roller chalk. You can almost kind of see it. Yeah. And make just a little like tick mark, similar to marking our darts. So I'm going to make a little tick mark here. For buttons, I like to do an 8-ply. See if it will. So you can see there's a bunch of thread here. I just find that it takes less time, so I'm going to do a little dirty roll. I'm going to do a little dirty roll. Pull that down, and so now we have our really fat knot there. That's okay because it's going to be on the back side. It takes a lot more thread to do this, but the advantage is that you don't have to keep sewing and sewing and sewing and sewing to put your button on. And now let's get to the fun part. To me, this is the fun part. This is the frosting on the cake. You know, your cake has been baked. You've done your crumb coat, and now we get to do the fun frosting. So I use Sharpie. I would normally never use Sharpie, but I thought it would possibly show up a little bit better on camera. A little bit. So I'm going to come up from the bottom, pull my thread, make sure we have a good taut. Oh, look at that. Something didn't get caught. Let's start over. Dirty roll, take 2. Get rid of that knot. Start from the bottom. Now these buttons have a shank on them. That's what this is called. That little hole in the back. It is a shank button and not a standard hole button. It just makes it a little bit easier. That means we're just gonna actually go straight through here, almost like a whip stitch, go around and round and round, and then we're gonna tie off our thread and move on to the next. The other way would be that we would do, I usually do like a little X with the 4 holes, or if you have a 2-hole button, you just go back and forth, back and forth. Many different buttons, many different holes, many different options, but they're all buttons and we love them all. We are an equal button opportunity sewing on place here. Okay, I don't know where I was going with that. Okay, so I just did 2 quick little stitches and then remembered I was supposed to be doing a demonstration. So I've already gone through twice. That means I have now 16 threads. I'm gonna go down where my dot is, come up on the back side. This is my 3rd. That's usually all I do if my thread is 8-ply because that's a lot of thread, and it's not like this vest is going to be on stage. Now if this was in theater, so I'm about to tie off, right? Now if this was in theater, I would do a lot more thread because actors they know how to destroy everything, especially buttons and garments. So I have my little loop, go back through the loop. This is how we tie off all of our buttons and general hand sewing. I'm gonna make another one. So I make just a tiny little stitch, baby stitch, pull, go back through the loop, and I'll do one more. All right, make sure it's good and taut. Grab your snips. Here they are. Grab the snips. Cut our thread. Dirty roll again. We're ready to go on to the next one. Even though I haven't sewn on all our buttons, you don't have to sew on all the buttons before you can open a buttonhole. There's no rule like that. You can do one, you can see how it looks, and move on. So what I like to do, this is something that Deanna, a woman who was the costume shop manager when I was in college, taught me how to do, and I think it's a really good plan because it has a little safety involved. So at the ends of your buttonhole, she would tell us to put a little stoppers here, because what a lot of people like to do is take your seam ripper, take a seam ripper here. I do own one, I just don't use it that frequently because my snips are always at hand, and they will say take your seam ripper, punch a hole, so punch down into it, and then push forward. Now this is a fine plan. It depends on how sharp your seam ripper is, it depends on how small your seam ripper is, and it depends on how thick your fabric is. The problem with this method without these pins here is you will cut straight through your fabric. I have done it, I've seen students do it, I think everybody who's sewn has probably done it. So we can open it this way. This is not my favorite, but it is a good way to get it started. You kind of have to like push pretty hard to see if I can. It's hard to push and demonstrate. Push. Now the problem is if you don't have this little bumper here, you will cut all the way through. So go to the end. I'm going to turn this way. And you can always go in, and I usually will do this, and I'll clip some of these extra threads, especially on a loose weave like a denim. There's going to be loose threads. So push. The other way is to take your snips. You can go in and snip it. Sometimes if the fabric is too much, I'll make a little incision with the seam ripper, and then I'll take my shears because they are very strong, and I'll go in and just cut it. Use these as little snips. Ta-da! It's a hole! Now that we have our button hole open, and we have one single button, one single hole, let's go ahead and put it on. Ta-da! Ta-da-da-da-da-da-da! Here we go. Button and buttonhole. Now this is a good size buttonhole. Like, you can actually get the button through it. I'm really glad I made this buttonhole bigger because odd shaped buttons are sometimes the hardest to get through. Boom, easy, easy peasy. Now what I like to do is to go in and, like I said, I'll clip some of these little threads. That way they're not showing, and then they seem to sort of go away eventually as time goes on. I also like to take fray check, which is something you can get even at Walmart in their sewing section. And it's essentially like a very thin, clear nail polish, and run some liquid nail. Now be careful. If you have fabric that is silk or satin or something that you can't put water on, test it first, because sometimes fray check will leave like a dark watermark because it is a chemical. It is something that you're adding to the fabric. With this, it will just go into it. Another note about fray check is that it is toxic. It is flammable, so use it in a well-ventilated area. And if you are a person who is pregnant, do not use fray check. It's too toxic and you don't want it to get on your hands. Some things I've read about fray check say that it could cause a miscarriage. I'm not sure how much fray check you would have to ingest to induce a miscarriage, but I always just tell anybody in the shop that is pregnant, like, just stay away from fray check. Just ask somebody else to do it for you because it's not worth the risk. And also, it really should be something that's used outside. All right, enough about fray check. I'm gonna go ahead and open up all of these and sew on the rest of my buttons, and then we'll have a final showing on the mannequin. Well, it's done. It's finally done. The last thing to do is to iron it, get rid of any excess threads that you see, especially threads from our buttonholes. And did I say iron? Iron again, and maybe even use some starch. I just like the way it looks. So I'm gonna pull this a little tighter in the back. Again, this is a female form, so it's not gonna give us the good broad shoulders, but we can at least see what our vest looks like. Here's the side view. Here's the back view. Side and the front. So if you wanted to, you can press here, which I recommend, and it will create a crease here and it will give you the vest front that you want. Or if you want like a slightly more rolled collar, but I like it like this so we can see our pretty buttons. And that's it. That's the final step for a vest, and then wear it somewhere or give it away as a gift. Do as you'd like with it. So thank you for watching this video series. It's the first time I've ever sewn on camera before and used a pattern and had to figure everything out. So if it was a little awkward, that's just life. That's just life with me. And but I really do truly love sewing, and I love sewing with patterns because you can do so much with patterns. And this one we didn't stray from the straight of grain, as we'll say, but a lot of times I use like 4 or 5 different patterns and just kind of mix and match and different things, and draft patterns and drape patterns. And so maybe in the future I'll do a video on some basic draping stuff, and I'll use this dress for its original purpose and intention. Anyways, see you later. Thanks for watching.